The Gator's Bait. Chapter 1. Perfect Surfaces. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Sunny Bay's pristine canals, turning the water into sheets of molten glass. Dr. Olivia Odin adjusted her sun hat and checked her Rolex. 7 a.m., precisely when she preferred to walk Buddy and Dixie. Her golden retriever strained against his leash, eager to investigate every scent, while the Bernese mountain dog padded calmly beside her. 20 years of software quality assurance had trained Olivia's eye to spot anomalies, and Sunny Bay was full of them. The lawns were too perfect, cut to identical heights. The docks extended into the canal at mathematically precise intervals. Even the American flags hanging from the porches seemed to flutter in synchronized patterns. She paused at the bend near Eleanor Whitmore's pale yellow house. Through the screened lanai, she could see the woman tending her orchids, dozens of them arranged in perfect rows, their blooms almost unnaturally vibrant. Eleanor caught sight of her and offered a brief wave, but her smile seemed fragile, like porcelain that might crack under pressure. "Morning, Eleanor," Olivia called. "Oh, hello, Dr. Odin." Eleanor's voice carried that particular strain of southern politeness that suggested she'd rather be left alone. "Lovely weather, isn't it?" The exchange lasted exactly as long as courtesy demanded, before Eleanor retreated into her flower sanctuary. Olivia made a mental note, another perfect surface with something hidden underneath. As she continued her walk, a midnight blue Bentley Continental GT purred past, its chrome catching the sun like a knife blade. Robert Bob Carver sat behind the wheel, his gold Rolex glinting as he waved from the driver's seat. The car was as polished and ostentatious as the man himself, Sunny Bay's self-appointed king, architect of their perfect community. Olivia had watched Carver operate at HOA meetings, commanding the room with practiced charm, while his eyes remained cold as winter steel. He spoke of community pride and property values, but she'd noticed how his smile never quite reached his eyes, how his hand lingered too long on people's shoulders when making a point. Her phone buzzed, a text from her neighbor Martha. "Big doings tonight at the Hendersons' lanai. Carver's unveiling his new sunken cypress clubhouse plans. You coming?" Olivia typed back, "Maybe. Walking the dogs now." She wouldn't go, of course. These social gatherings were performance theater, and she preferred to observe from the margins. Besides, Buddy needed his exercise, and the morning light revealed details that evening shadows might hide. Chapter 2. The Performance. The Hendersons' screened-in patio buzzed with the particular energy of suburban intrigue. Robert Carver stood at the center of the gathering, his white polo shirt crisp as fresh snow, his pressed trousers creating perfect creases. The artist's rendering of his proposed sunken cypress clubhouse lay spread across the glass table like a battle plan. "Soaring glass walls," Carver was saying, his voice pitched to carry just the right note of excitement. "A terrace designed for the finest entertaining. Valet service, premium dining." He adjusted the heavy gold timepiece on his wrist, a habit Eleanor Whitmore had noticed during every interaction. "This isn't just construction, folks. This is the future of Sunny Bay and our new sunken cypress golf course." Eleanor stood at the edge of the group beside her husband John, her hands clasped tightly in front of her silk blouse. She'd applied her usual light floral perfume, but tonight it couldn't quite mask the tension radiating from her slight frame. John, meanwhile, practically vibrated with barely contained energy, his monogrammed golf shirt stretched across his expanding middle. "What about the environmental impact?" John's voice cut through Carver's presentation like a rusty blade. "Those wetlands behind the 7th hole, all properly surveyed and approved," Carver replied smoothly, but his smile tightened at the corners. The county has signed off on everything. Mike Mitchell spoke from his position near the drinks table. Bob's right about the approvals. I've seen the paperwork myself. Mitchell cultivated a deliberately modest appearance, khaki shorts, a faded polo, boat shoes without socks. But Olivia had noticed his yacht moored at the premium slip, its chrome gleaming like jewelry. Just seems awful fast, John persisted. All those permits approved in record time. Makes a man wonder. Wonder about what, exactly? Carver's voice dropped to a register that made several people unconsciously step back. Eleanor touched her husband's arm, a gentle warning that everyone in the group could feel. John, perhaps we should— No, Elle. Someone needs to ask the hard questions. John's face was flushed. Whether from alcohol or anger, Eleanor couldn't tell. This community deserves transparency. Carver moved closer to John, close enough that the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the evening air. When he placed his hand on John's shoulder, it looked friendly to casual observers, but Eleanor saw the way Carver's fingers pressed into the fabric, the subtle display of dominance. John, Carver said quietly, I think you've had enough excitement for one evening. The threat hung in the humid air like morning fog. Conversations resumed, but with forced lightness. People began drifting toward their cars and golf carts. The evening's entertainment concluded. Eleanor walked home in silence beside her husband, noting how his breathing had become shallow and quick. She knew that look John was planning something, and in her experience, John's plans rarely ended well. Chapter 3. The Seventh Hole. 3 days later, Eleanor woke to find John's side of the bed empty and cold. His custom cologne still lingered on his pillow, the unique scent he'd commissioned from a boutique in Naples, incorporating extracts from her prized orchids. Our signature scent, he'd called it, one of his many small vanities. She found him in the kitchen, already dressed in his golf clothes, wolfing down scrambled eggs. Early round today? She asked, pouring herself coffee from the machine. Felt like walking the course before it gets crowded. John barely looked up from his plate. Want to check something at the seventh hole? Eleanor's stomach tightened. John, about the other night. Carver thinks he can intimidate me. John's voice carried the brittle confidence of a man who'd never been truly threatened. He's about to learn otherwise. What are you planning? Just going to document a few things. Take some pictures. He stood, kissing her cheek with lips that tasted of orange juice and determination. Don't worry, Elle. I know what I'm doing. She watched from the kitchen window as he loaded his personalized golf bag into their cart and drove toward the course. The morning light was still soft, painting the canal in shades of rose and gold. It should have been beautiful, but Eleanor felt only a growing sense of dread. John never came home for lunch. Eleanor tried calling his phone at noon, then again at 1 o'clock. By 2, she was pacing the enclosed porch, her orchids forgotten. At 3, she walked to the pro shop, but the staff hadn't seen him. It was Frank, the head groundskeeper, who found him just before 4 o'clock. The body lay half in the pond at the 7th hole, clothes torn and bloody, skin marked by the distinctive puncture wounds of an alligator attack. John's golf bag was overturned nearby, expensive clubs scattered across the manicured grass like fallen soldiers. Eleanor arrived as the sheriff's department finished their preliminary investigation. She stood behind the yellow tape, her floral perfume mixing with the humid air and the darker sense of tragedy. The massive alligator that had killed her husband floated nearby, its ancient eyes watching the proceedings with reptilian indifference. Tragic accident, Sheriff Martinez told her, his voice gentle but firm. "Your husband got too close to the water. These gators, they're ambush predators. Quick as lightning when they strike." Eleanor nodded, accepting the condolences of neighbors who'd gathered at a respectful distance. She played the role of grieving widow, perfectly composed but fragile, devastated but brave. Inside, her thoughts churned like dark water. Only she knew about the phone call she'd received that morning after John left. Only she knew about the bargain she'd been forced to make. And only she knew that her husband's death had been anything but accidental. Chapter 4. The Observer. Dr. Olivia Odin arrived at the 7th hole as the body was being removed. She'd heard the sirens from her house and followed them with the instinctive curiosity of someone trained to investigate anomalies. The scene bothered her immediately. John's golf ball sat on the green, precisely positioned for an easy putt. His clubs were scattered, but their arrangement seemed almost artistic rather than random. The alligator floated motionless in the pond, too convenient, too perfectly positioned to be entirely natural. "Terrible business," said Mitchell, who'd appeared beside her with his characteristic soft-footed approach. John always was reckless around the water. Was he? Olivia studied Mitchell's face, noting the careful neutrality of his expression. "I wouldn't have thought him the type." "Oh, you'd be surprised. He used to feed the gators from the dock behind his house. Eleanor was always after him to stop." Mitchell's voice carried just the right note of neighborly concern. "Guess they remembered where the food came from." Olivia nodded politely, but something in Mitchell's explanation felt rehearsed. She made a mental note to pay closer attention to the man who worked so hard to appear unremarkable. That evening, she walked Buddy and Dixie past Eleanor's house. The widow sat alone on her screened porch, surrounded by her orchids, an untouched glass of wine beside her chair. Eleanor looked up as they passed and offered a small wave. In the lamplight, her face appeared hollow, carved from pale stone. "Mrs. Whitmore," Olivia called softly, "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Dr. Odin." Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. "John always said you were one of the observant ones." The comment struck Olivia as oddly specific, almost like a message. She lingered by the screen, searching Eleanor's face for additional meaning. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can do?" Eleanor's fingers moved to her throat, touching a delicate silver necklace. "Just keep watching, I suppose." John would have wanted that. The next morning, Olivia found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a cash register receipt from Everglades Outfitters, dated 3 days before John's death. The item purchased was listed as alligator pheromone extract, professional grade. The buyer's name, printed clearly at the bottom, was Michael Mitchell. Chapter 5. Hidden Truths. Olivia spent the morning at the county clerk's office, requesting land records for the Sunny Bay development. Her meticulous professional instincts had taught her that inconsistencies usually pointed toward larger problems, and John Whitmore's death felt like a major inconsistency. The files revealed a disturbing pattern. Wetland maps had been mysteriously revised, environmental warnings removed, and building permits approved with unusual speed. The area around the 7th hole had originally been deemed unsuitable for development due to unstable soil and water seepage issues. Later revisions, bearing Robert Carver's signature, had cleared the land for construction. Buried deeper in the files, she found John's formal complaint letter to the Environmental Oversight Board. His language was careful but damning. He'd suspected fraud and was prepared to present evidence at a public hearing. The hearing had been scheduled for next week. "Find what you're looking for?" The clerk, A woman named Sandra, with kind eyes and gray hair, peered over her reading glasses. "More than I expected," Olivia replied. "These land revisions, do they seem legitimate to you?" Sandra glanced around the empty office, then leaned closer. "Between us, I've processed a lot of permits over the years. Never seen environmental restrictions lifted that fast, especially not for protected wetlands." She tapped the file with one finger. "Someone with serious pull made those changes happen." That afternoon, Olivia drove to Eleanor's house. She found the widow in her garden, spraying her orchids with a fine mist from a small bottle. The air was thick with floral perfume, not Eleanor's usual scent, but something stronger, more complex. "Mrs. Whitmore, I was wondering about John's cologne, the custom scent you helped him create." Eleanor's hand stilled on the spray bottle. "What about it? It must have been expensive, using extracts from your orchids." "John liked unique things." Eleanor's voice was carefully neutral. "He said it made him distinctive." "The morning he died, did he wear it?" Eleanor set down the spray bottle with shaking hands. "Why are you asking me this?" Olivia pulled out the receipt she'd found under her door. "Because someone bought alligator pheromones 3 days before your husband's death. Someone who might have known about his custom cologne." Eleanor stared at the paper for a long moment, her face cycling through expressions: surprise, fear, resignation, and, finally, a kind of desperate relief. "You don't understand," Eleanor whispered. "None of you understand what he's capable of." Chapter 6. The Truth Emerges. Eleanor invited Olivia inside, away from potential eavesdroppers. The house was immaculate but cold, like a museum where no one actually lived. They sat in the living room, surrounded by perfectly arranged furniture and carefully curated art. "Robert Carver discovered my affair with Michael," Eleanor began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how, but he knew. Phone calls, text messages, meetings on Michael's boat." She twisted her wedding ring around her finger. "He called me the morning John went golfing." "What did he want?" "He said John was becoming a problem, that his investigation could ruin everything." Eleanor's voice cracked. "He told me I could help solve the problem, or he could solve 2 problems instead of 1. Olivia felt ice form in her stomach. "He threatened you." "He was very specific about what he knew. Times, dates, photographs. He said he'd destroy me socially, financially, make sure everyone in Sunny Bay knew what kind of woman I really was." Tears finally came, sliding down Eleanor's cheeks like rain on glass. But that wasn't the worst part. "What was the worst part?" "He knew about John's cologne. Knew I'd helped create it using my orchid extracts." Eleanor's hands shook as she reached for a tissue. "He told me exactly how to modify it. Said it would just frighten John. Make the alligators more aggressive, but not necessarily—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "So you added the pheromones to his cologne?" Eleanor nodded miserably. "1 drop. That's all Carver said it would take. He promised John would just get scared, maybe fall in the water, but that someone would rescue him before—" She buried her face in her hands. "I never wanted him to die, Dr. Odin. John was difficult, but he was my husband." "What about Mitchell? Was he involved?" "Michael supplied the pheromones, but I don't think he knew what they were really for. Carver told him it was for pest control around the development." Eleanor looked up, her eyes red with tears. "We were all just pieces in his game. He used our weaknesses against us, made us complicit without understanding the full scope." Olivia sat back. processing the enormity of what Eleanor had revealed. Carver hadn't just orchestrated a murder. He'd manipulated 3 people into participating in their own destruction. The developer's greatest skill wasn't construction or charm. It was understanding exactly how much pressure each person could bear before breaking. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. Before Olivia could answer, they heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Through the window, they could see Carver's midnight blue Bentley gleaming in the afternoon sun. "He's coming for you," Olivia said quietly. Eleanor went pale. "He said he'd be in touch after the funeral to discuss next steps." The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the perfect empty house. Eleanor and Olivia looked at each other, both understanding that whatever happened next would determine not just their own fates, but the future of Sunny Bay itself. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The new Sunken Cypress clubhouse opening was everything Robert Carver had promised. Gleaming glass and chrome, expensive champagne, and the cream of Sunny Bay society dressed in their finest resort wear. Carver moved through the crowd like a conquering general, accepting congratulations with his practiced smile, the famous watch on his wrist catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. Dr. Olivia Odin stood near the bar, nursing a gin and tonic she had no intention of drinking. She'd spent the week since Eleanor's confession carefully planning this moment, gathering evidence, and preparing for the most important presentation of her life. Eleanor sat at a corner table with Mitchell, both of them pale and nervous. They'd agreed to Olivia's plan, though she could see the fear in their eyes. Carver's control over the community seemed absolute challenging. Him publicly felt like professional suicide. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carver called out, tapping his glass with a butter knife, "thank you all for celebrating this milestone with me. The new Sunken Cypress Clubhouse represents everything Sunny Bay aspires to be: elegant, exclusive, and perfectly safe." Polite applause rippled through the room. Carver basked in it, his smile broadening. "Before we move to the terrace for the fireworks," he continued, "I want to address some unfortunate rumors that have been circulating since John Whitmore's tragic accident." Olivia felt her pulse quicken. He was going to try to control the narrative preemptively. Some people have suggested that John's death was anything other than a terrible encounter with Florida wildlife. I want to assure you all that the sheriff's investigation was thorough and complete. John Whitmore died because he ignored basic safety protocols around dangerous animals. "That's not entirely accurate," Olivia said, her voice cutting clearly through the hushed room. All heads turned toward her. Carver's smile flickered but held. "Dr. Odin, isn't it? I'm sure we'd all love to hear your thoughts on wildlife safety." Olivia walked to the center of the room, pulling a small vial from her purse. The liquid inside was clear as water, but carried a pungent, musky scent that several guests immediately noticed. "This is alligator pheromone extract," she announced. "It's designed to attract alligators from considerable distances and trigger aggressive behavior." She held up a white cocktail napkin. "1 drop of this substance on fabric will draw every alligator within a quarter-mile radius." The room had gone completely silent. Even the bartender had stopped mixing drinks. 3 days before John Whitmore's death, someone purchased this exact extract from Everglades Outfitters. Olivia looked directly at Mitchell. The receipt bears Michael Mitchell's name. Mitchell stood slowly, his face gray but resolute. "That's true. I bought the pheromones, but I was told they were for pest control around the new development." "Who told you that?" Olivia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Robert Carver." A murmur ran through the crowd. Carver's smile finally disappeared. replaced by something cold and dangerous. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Michael's obviously trying to deflect blame for his own." I laced my husband's cologne with the pheromones. Eleanor's voice was barely audible, but in the perfect silence of the room, everyone heard her. "Robert Carver blackmailed me into doing it." The murmur became a roar. Guests turned to stare at Eleanor, then at Carver, their faces cycling through confusion, shock, and growing anger. "Eleanor's obviously distraught," Carver said quickly. "She's not thinking clearly." "I have recordings of our phone conversations," Eleanor continued, pulling out her cell phone. "3 calls where you explicitly threatened to destroy me unless I helped you eliminate John." Carver's face went white. "You're lying." "Play them," Olivia said. Eleanor's finger moved to the phone's screen. Carver's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the room. "John's becoming a real problem, Eleanor. His investigation could bring down everything I've built here, everything we've all built. Now, you can help me solve this problem, or I can solve 2 problems instead of 1. The recording continued for 2 more minutes, Carver's voice growing more threatening with each exchange. When it ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Sheriff Martinez stepped out of the crowd, his hand resting on his service weapon. "Robert Carver, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Carver's carefully constructed world finally collapsed. The man who had ruled Sunny Bay through charm and intimidation was led away in disgrace, his gold Rolex glinting one final time in the sunken Cypress Club house lights. Epilogue. 6 months later, Olivia walked Buddy and Dixie past the abandoned sunken Cypress Club house. Nature was already beginning to reclaim Carver's monument. Vines crept up the glass walls, and weeds sprouted through cracks in the perfect concrete. Eleanor had moved away quietly after the trial, leaving no forwarding address. Mitchell had plea-bargained his way to probation and community service, his yacht sold to pay legal fees. The 7th hole had been redesigned, the problematic pond filled in and replanted with native vegetation. Sunny Bay's perfect facade had been shattered, but somehow the community felt more genuine now. Neighbors spoke more openly with each other, the rigid social hierarchies softened by shared trauma and truth. Olivia paused at the spot where she'd first noticed Eleanor tending her orchids. The new owners had replaced the exotic blooms with a simple vegetable garden: tomatoes, peppers, herbs. It was less elegant, but more alive, a small symbol of how authentic beauty could emerge from the wreckage of manufactured perfection. As she walked home in the fading light, Olivia reflected on the lessons of the past year. Even the most carefully constructed illusions eventually cracked under pressure, revealing the human truths beneath. In Sunny Bay, that revelation had come at a terrible cost, but perhaps that was the price of building a community on lies rather than trust. The canal reflected the sunset in ripples of gold and crimson, beautiful and real in a way that Robert Carver's vision never could have been. Somewhere in the water, alligators moved through their ancient rhythms, neither good nor evil, simply part of Florida's wild heart that no amount of development could fully tame. Buddy pulled eagerly toward home, where dinner and familiar routines waited. Olivia smiled and followed, grateful for the simple, uncomplicated loyalty of dogs and the hard-won peace of a community that had finally learned to value truth over perfection.